Thank you, Henye. Yummy. One of the most popular yet most expensive delicacies one could ever name in the whole world. But did you know that there are very few countries that can produce cocoa?
And that 2/3 of the world's chocolate is made of Ghana and Ivory Coast cocoa?
So if you have ever enjoyed the taste of this celestial delicacy, it is probably thanks to a Ghanaian or Ivorian farmer's labor.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Africa Today. I'm Mubarak Kenya.
And I am Sheila Nelima. In today's program, we will take a look at the chocolate industry and the formation of COPEC by two African countries, namely Ghana and Ivory Coast.
And in the next section of the show, we'll discuss another game of Africa that the whole world depends upon, crude oil.
And as usual, I have news from all over Africa. I will also read the comments that we have received from you.
So stay with us till the end of the program.
COPEC, OPEC for cocoa. Chocolate is the world's favorite confectionery. An ongoing catalyst for growth is the flexibility of this ingredient. It can be used in beverages, foods, desserts, breakfasts, spreads, and everything in between. Chocolate manufacturing is a thriving business in which big companies make high profits. While these companies are competing for ever higher market shares and higher profits, millions of cocoa farmers bear the costs by getting less and less share from the revenues.
Le prix pour le cacao au moment?
Pour le moment, on ne sait pas. On nous a dit 800 CN. Mais dans le village, on paie ça à 700 CN.
C'est toujours le même prix?
Oui, 700 CN.
Ça ne change pas.
Pareil, le transport là, et puis là-bas, là. Ça nous c'est ici, là, 500.
Anthony Fountain, Managing Director of Voice Network, watchdog and catalyst for a reformed cocoa sector from Amsterdam, is here with us to share his views. Now, Mr. Fountain, what is the global profit from the chocolate industry, and how much of these is the share of cocoa producers?
So the entire cocoa sector has sales of upwards of $100 billion per year. And it is estimated that between 4, 5, 6% of that eventually comes to the farmers and the producer governments.
Anthony Fountain, Managing Director, Voice Network.
In 2016 alone, the chocolate industry posted global retail sales of $98 billion. While it might seem like we've reached peak consumption for a product that's been enjoyed for at least 3 millennia, there's projections for further growth on the horizon, thanks to developing markets.
Now, between 2019 and 2027, the size of the global chocolate confectionery market is projected to grow by almost $60 billion US. But which countries make the most profit out of chocolate making?
So it's not necessarily countries that make profit. Cocoa and the chocolate industry is run by companies. And so in the end, it's the companies and the different multinationals that are the ones that will be earning most of the money. Farmers, even though there's many millions of farmers that grow cocoa, they earn very little of this. Now, there's obviously government profits that go in, taxes both in the producer nations as well as the value-added tax in consuming nations. So there's quite a lot of money that goes into the taxes as well. But in the end, it's the multinationals that make by far the most money in the sector.
Within the global value chain, most of the money is made after the beans have reached the global north. At the same time, many cocoa farmers and workers in the global south have to get by on less than $1.25 US a day, below the threshold of absolute poverty in an extreme way to have never tasted a piece of chocolate.
En tout cas, nous, on ne sait pas comment on prend le cacao là même pour feu. Mais comme on dit de prendre cacao là, on est là pour prendre cacao. Parce qu'on parle que cacao là c'est un manger, mais nous on ne connaît pas comment on prend pour faire.
Being aware of these numbers and considering the fact that Ghana and Ivory Coast produce more than 65% of cocoa in the globe, one might probably wonder if the product was sold fairly, how much could it help these two countries with their economy?
if you as a country have an economy that works well, where your people are paid well, then obviously you've got a burgeoning group of people that can invest in their local community, send their kids to school. It drives the formation of a middle class, of a services economy, etc. So in that sense, it's really good for the countries themselves. It also provides tax revenue by which you can then build roads and schools and healthcare, etc. For farmers themselves, obviously, if farmers would have a higher income, then they wouldn't have to live in extreme poverty. They could send their kids to school. There would be a lot less malnutrition and all those things. So it really would make a difference.
Imagine what this amount of money can do to a company or a country.
For example, a huge company such as Google had $45 billion revenue in 2019 at most. And you see how the whole world is relying on this single company. So what can $60 billion do for a nation?
Now, having all this in mind, you may also be interested to know the price of cocoa beans is so low compared to chocolate.
The price of cocoa is really derived from the world market. So when you look at how much does a ton of cocoa cost, then to a very large extent, that is a function of supply and demand of the global world market. And you see that a lot of the companies, a lot of the different actors in the chain are very large companies, and they keep each other relatively well in balance. Now, the reason why the price is so low is because despite the fact that the companies keep each other in balance, the farmers have virtually no selling power. They don't have the power to bargain for better prices. And so their price is basically whatever they can get.
Cocoa farmers are the very first and absolutely the most important people in the chain of chocolate making, yet the ones who benefit the least out of this market. But cocoa is not the only crop in Africa enduring this unjust process.
Now, that's not just the case in cocoa, but just about every tropical commodity has the same problem, that farmers are not being paid enough for the produce that they make. And so the other problem is that even if you'd solve the problem in cocoa, you would still have the same problem in coffee and in cotton and in palm oil, which means that everyone would all of a sudden start growing cocoa.
But Africa seems to get aware of the problem. Inspired by OPEC, Ivory Coast and Ghana announced in December 2019 a fixed price premium of $2,600 a ton over the benchmark cocoa futures price for every contract sold by either country for the 2020-2029 season.
What we consider the floor price is $2,600. What was agreed, or what we understood to be the system of trading going forward, is to have what we refer to as the living income differential. The living income differential is $400, which we place on every ton of cocoa.
This initiative tries to help these farmers as well as the African economies through lawful strategies to sell their product.
Many experts argue that the formation of COPEC may also lead to the disappearance of smuggling in this market, leading to the African country's economical flourishment.
And in this section of our program, my colleague will be presenting you with news and events from across Africa. What do you have today for us, Sheila?
Thank you, Henia. This week we have news from all four corners of the continent. To start us off, Tanzania is reaping benefits from the electronic tax stamp system. The country's revenue authority has seen a 2% increase in revenue collection since the beginning of the system in 2019. The electronic stamp is placed on branded products and has also improved tax administration, reducing counterfeit production from the Tanzanian market. Now on to Mozambique. The old Maputo bullfighting arena is to be developed. The Secretary of State for Sport confirmed the news while visiting the 1956 enclosure, which is currently being used as a vehicle repair business center. The space is to be constructed into an attractive sports and entertainment venue. Now, Cabo Verde is set to exempt photovoltaic panels from value-added tax. The tax measure, which was presented in Parliament, applies to solar panels and solar batteries imported by licensed companies. The aim is to mitigate the effects of 3 years of drought in the archipelago. Now, in other news, Yahya Jammeh is under legal scrutiny. An ongoing civil lawsuit has caused the United States authorities to seize his mansion in Maryland. The former dictator faces accusations of having conspired to launder around $3.5 million in corruption funds through which he purchased the lavish house. He's also said to have acquired at least 281 properties and over 100 private bank accounts during his time in office. Now, the Moroccan Ministry of Tourism unveiled a new program to revive the tourism sector. The revival program is set to cover period 2020 to 2022. The project aims to support the Moroccan economy while preserving jobs in the tourism industry. The ministry stressed the need for participation by tourism professionals and the relevant government departments. Now, still on Morocco, the Portuguese embassy in Morocco has called on photographers from both countries to participate in a photography competition titled Olhares Cruzados. It encourages artists to represent the country's bilateral relations by 1. Promoting the history of their relation, and 2. Highlighting their economic relations. Now, this brings us to the end of this part. Please stay tuned for more.
Nigeria oil matter.
Nigeria is one of the world's largest oil producers. Its reserves make Nigeria the 10th most petroleum-rich nation and by far the most affluent in Africa. In mid-2001, its crude oil production was averaging around 2,200,000 barrels per day.
Nigeria is also one of the few major oil-producing nations still capable of increasing its oil output. But why is Nigeria suffering a higher rate of poverty than other African nations that do not own oil?
Of the money that the Nigerian government gets, how much is reinvested into the lives of the people?
With an abundance of natural resources, it remains Africa's #1 producer in terms of GDP output. For more analysis, we are joined by Joseph Ochieno, African Affairs commentator. Mr. Ochieno, thanks for joining us. How much is the Nigerian economy dependent on its crude oil?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And it's a pity, really, because it's very high, up to 90%, perhaps up to 95% of the exports, Nigerian exports, are directly from oil. And over 40%, of the government expenditure is also, the Nigerian economy is extremely oil dependent. And yet this is not only a very large country, but it is also a very diverse and innovative country. So what it's telling you is that, yes, while they've been substantially blessed by oil, I think they've possibly been too over-dependent on oil thus far. So very, very high. Anything that happens with and related to oil will directly impact on the day-to-day livelihood of the Nigerian people.
Nigeria, Africa's largest economy, is so over-dependent on crude oil that it makes up about 90% of its export earnings and more than 60% of Nigeria's federal government revenue. As Nigeria has an oil-dependent economy, many Nigerians work in this sector and many make a living out of this industry.
You would say possibly 65, 70,000 direct employed in the sector, that's official, and indirectly possibly up to 300,000 benefit that in a linked indirect way to the sector. Yes, Nigeria is fairly loud in terms of their ability to assert, in fact. So they have, and it's a very well-educated a country. So they've got, most Nigerians do quite well within the sector.
With the official facts and figures reported in the media, Nigeria is Africa's greatest oil producer. Many analyze that the real numbers of oil barrels daily produced in Nigeria is even much greater than the official numbers, and many barrels disappear due to lack of transparency, corruption, theft, and lack of infrastructure to refine crude oil. Mr. Ochieno, do you have any idea what the real numbers might be?
Nobody knows whether those are actually accurate from their own sources, in part because the manner in which the Nigerian governments over the years have handled the oil revenues, oil resources, and the oil-producing communities means that there's a huge amount of resentment, and that therefore, as a result, not only is there localized corruption, but compromised production, including, therefore, huge amount of smuggling and a huge amount of compromising of the oil pipes. So yes, nobody really knows the general capacity, but what is certain is that there are different interests in the oil sector, and by the time the oil arrives at people's vehicles and automobiles, it will have come through very many different kinds of sources.
Internal corruption and foreign oil companies' greed and exploitation, one along with another, make many barrels disappear each day. NNPC is Nigeria's National Petroleum Corporation, which has several subsidiaries. But the companies doing the most exploring and extracting are international ones. Shell, for example, provides 40% of Nigeria's oil production. And that's why, despite the large number of indigenous people working for Nigeria's oil industry sector, the number of local people hired in key positions is low.
But that said, most of the companies that are thriving there, whether they're Shell, Chevron, IG, many of these are multinational companies that come with their chiefs, meaning the biggest bosses, the biggest bosses, the key positions continue to be held by foreigners who would be basically guys coming from the major capitals, be it Paris or London, or indeed for this case, Washington, and in this case, in many cases, China, because China is also involved in the Nigerian and oil sector.
The involvement of foreign companies can never be free of corruption. In 2018, for example, a court in Milan considered charges of corruption against Eni and Shell in a controversial oil deal that led to the Nigerian government losing an estimated $6 billion. But who is guilty in this matter, the Nigerian government or foreign companies?
I was quite hopeful that President Buhari would do a lot more than he has done in the sector, but possibly I was rather too ambitious generally. I think generally it has been a question of governance, unless and until maybe the major changes at state level, and don't forget, many of these things involve huge amount of money with a huge amount of corruption, and where there is an element of state capture, it's not as many places as in the oil sector where there's a huge amount of money.
International oil companies are supposed to pay taxes on their oil profits to NNPC, but companies are accused of reporting lower profits in order to pay fewer taxes. So the company may sell the Nigerian oil at a lower price to its own subsidiary to pay less tax, and then sell it to other buyers at a very higher price. They may also lie about the volume of oil they produce. Eni and Shell are also accused of knowing the money they paid to Nigeria would be used for bribes. However, the Italian and Anglo-Dutch energy giants deny any wrongdoing.
In 2011, oil companies Shell and Eni set up a deal in Nigeria for drilling rights to one of Africa's biggest oil fields. But the money was paid to a convicted money launderer and ex-oil minister, depriving the country of money equivalent to more than the 2016 healthcare budget.
The former Nigerian oil minister Dan Etete was found guilty by a court in France of money laundering, and it emerged he used illicit funds to buy a speedboat and a chateau. It is also claimed he had so much cash in $100 bills that it weighed 5 tons.
In public, Shell CEO Ben van Beurden has claimed the payment was a settlement with the Nigerian government. Instead, the money went to private pockets. Leaked emails, seen by Global Witness, show that Shell executives knew this and understood the money could be used for paying people off. According to prosecutors, millions of dollars were paid to Nigeria's most powerful politicians, one of whom spent a chunk of it on armoured cars, luxury shotguns, and a private jet.
The other issue which is always raised when talking about Nigerian oil is that Nigeria is only selling crude oil and not secondary petroleum products, which is on its own a great loss for Nigeria. Nigeria does not have the infrastructure to refine its own crude oil, and it has to spend billions of dollars on buying refined oil.
If only Nigeria could invest much more in the oil infrastructure, making sure that most of the oil is processed locally. And I think this government even actually promised as part of their campaigns a few years ago that they would go through the process of making sure that they process the crude and that in Nigeria and only sold out the finished product. That did not happen. Of course, it means therefore that Nigeria sells cheap oil cheaply, meaning that the oil at the pump is possibly more expensive than in countries where which do not produce oil at the moment.
Multinational actually extracts the oil. So if they think that refining the oil in Switzerland or refining it in the United States will help them lower costs, definitely that's where they will do it, because the capacity to refine it isn't there in Nigeria.
After coronavirus pandemic and the decrease in crude oil price, Nigeria is facing a new economic problem. So it seems the best way out for Nigeria is to be less dependent on its oil and to invest in other sectors such as agriculture, tourism, and technology as well.
Domestically generate and mobilize its own resources, become less oil dependent, meaning therefore that government revenues should be much more diversified. And because of doing that, you find that maybe most of the resources are able to be repulled back onto this.
In late June this year, the head of the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation promised a new season of transparency and accountability, pushing back against critics calling for the breakup of the state oil company as the country struggles to fall out from the battered oil prices. This vowed transparency could make a start point so that Nigerian people could have a bigger share of this national treasury.
Thanks for staying tuned and welcome back to our social media segment. This is what our viewers had for us this week. We had Tendai Mbofana tagging us in his article, "Pan-Africanism and anti-imperialism should never be abused to justify corruption, tyranny, and brutality against one's own citizenry." We also had another article from Lee Itleb stating the 6th EU-AU summit agreed to take place on 28th to 29th October in Brussels with a vision titled "Toward a Comprehensive Strategy with Africa." We also had Global Issues Web stating independence is at the heart of Africa Development Bank's ability to be effective. We also had Africa Global New stating incomes of rural producers and traders in parts of Tanzania have increased threefold, partly thanks to an African Development Bank-funded project to enhance market infrastructure, value addition, and rural finance. We also had another viewer, Nasenag, stating the African Development Bank Group has pretty good reports on economics and much more. We also had Natasha Akpoti stating, Africa Development Bank scandal. United States has the second largest voting right as a shareholder and has every right to demand investigation. If Africa doesn't like America's interference, then AFDB should be funded solely by African countries. Now, thanks for all the comments. We are waiting for more.
And that wraps it up for this episode of Africa Today.
Please keep us posted with your thoughts and comments till we come back to explore the ins and outs of Africa, the rising continent.
And thanks for staying with us till the end of the show. Goodbye from me, Mubarak Kenya.
And from me, Sheila Nelima, and the entire team. Goodbye and take care.